There are moments in every person's life when they face intense adversity. They're crucibles that forge who they become as individuals and as leaders. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are called to a higher standard, focused on leaving it better than they found it, and paying it forward to the next generations. Now, let's join Fire Chief Randy Brugman as he speaks with leaders from all walks of life, as he explores and learns from their personal journeys and the crucibles that have forged them into better leaders and better people.
Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Crucible podcast. Today, it's my pleasure to have on Bryan Adams. Bryan is a notable figure in the world of employer branding, serving as both the CEO and founder of Ph.Creative. His agency is highly regarded for its ability to create top-notch employer brand, EVP, and talent engagement strategies for some of the biggest names in the business, including Apple, Nike, Peloton, and Ford. As a thought leader in the field of employer branding, Bryan is known for his unconventional and even controversial methodologies. Many credit him with shaking up the industry and changing the way people think about employer branding and employee value proposition. He is a two-time best-selling author, a contributor to the Harvard Business Review, a podcaster, and a sought-after speaker on the topic of employer branding. Well, Bryan, welcome to the Leadership Crucible podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Well, that's my pleasure, Randy. Thanks for having me on.
So let's talk a little bit about, you wrote a book called Give and Get, and you discussed the need for companies to become an authentic employer, to attract top talent and to engage employees and drive business objectives. So can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by all of that?
Well, yeah, I think in this day and age, especially with the emergence of AI and technology becoming what is essentially a commodity, a utility like gas and electric and water, people are the only competitive advantage left in business. And I think employer brand strategy is now becoming more and more important. And to have the clarity and the confidence to understand the authentic employee experience and be able to leverage that in order to offer a differentiated message in the talent market space is just a huge competitive advantage to get an unfair share of top talent, and I think that's going to be the difference between the winners and losers of business going forward.
So let's dive into that a little bit, because I think one of the things and one of the questions I wanted to ask you is about value alignment. But with this generation that's coming in, Gen Z, probably Gen Alpha as well, one of the things that I've heard is that they're extremely smart. They have probably a much more of a worldview than many of us had, just because of access to knowledge and information. Their soft skills sometimes lack, and their ability to navigate in that in that environment that we call the bureaucracy of any company or organization. So what are you seeing from that perspective? And what are you hearing from the people that you're working with?
Yeah, well, I think you're spot on. I think, the younger generations now, these digital natives, they're born from a young age. They have an opinion and a view on the world. They're developing perspectives. It's an identity culture, And what's interesting is you can try and lean into that and game the system and try and just be more attractive. Or you can be an authentic version of your organization and lean into the strategic aspect of just aligning business strategy with the real culture of your organization and being able to tell stories, compelling stories about who you actually are, and start to attract people based on the idea that they can make informed decisions as to whether that aligns with their own values or not. So it's less about trying to be generally attractive and more offering a clear perspective of what you have to offer and setting expectations. Because let's face it, people are smart. They can smell when something doesn't quite add up. And
Yeah.
in a world where you might see 10,000 adverts in a day, we're also quite suspicious of something that just sounds too good to be true, or is just generally something that's filled with benefits and attractive rainbow and sunshine version of what might be true.
Yeah, very true. In your book, I picked up three key takeaways that I would like you to kind of dive into a little bit. And one is that you had I think in your book, you talked about organizational perspective and having a smart filter, storytelling, which you just mentioned, and using it at adversity to your own advantage.
Mm-hmm.
So could you share a little bit more about those three issues?
Yeah. So, first of all, when a brand is confident enough to share something that is perceived as a harsh reality or an adversity or a challenge, the sad truth is that's still a refreshing differentiator, because it's not something that a lot of
Mm-hmm.
organizations do. Um, but when you set out a proposition that involves putting the audience to a question, which is actually one of the most important questions that a candidate would ask themselves: do I have what it takes to thrive at that organization? And then, of course, they've got to work out whether that effort is worth it. But, you know, you and I might look at the same proposition of working for an organization, and I might decide, actually, that looks too hard for me. Whereas you, Radley, might say, wow, that looks like a real challenge that I will find meaning and purpose in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the difference really between trying to just look attractive and be the world's best employer to everybody, or being very clear on a proposition that actually seeks out to repel more people than it compels towards it.
So that's an interesting perspective because oftentimes, especially today, employers are having a hard time attracting talent. And so to say, well, I need 30 people, but I'm only going to take 15 of the right people. That's a kind of a different perspective for employers today, don't you think?
It is, but whilst the employer brand leader and the TA leader are doing somersaults and high fives over an increase in applications based on a more attractive brand, the recruiters are having heart attacks and having to work double shifts trying to deal with the deluge of applicants, and the candidate experience can suffer as a consequence. And of course, if you don't best set the expectations, the worst thing that can happen is you attract talent that is qualified and capable of doing the role, but isn't quite the culture fit or doesn't find what they were expecting on the other
Mm-hmm.
side. And after 6 months, they leave. So it's a false economy if it's not done right. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of organizations setting out to just be generally attractive, and it can waste a lot of time, effort, money, and budget.
Well, I think your point is extremely well taken because when you're trying to build your culture, or if you have built a culture that you're trying to sustain long term, the employees that you bring in will impact that. And if you bring in the wrong employees, it can really be disruptive.
Absolutely. I mean, you have the opportunity to nurture and be the guardians of a culture that people value, especially if it's one that is filled with acknowledgement and appreciation. If you bring people in that aren't a match or a positive addition, then that culture can be diluted, and you run the risk of that culture no longer being best designed to support the organization. And of course, it's not just about the warm and fuzzy feeling of working with the people around you and finding fulfillment.
Mm-hmm.
There's another really hard and sharp edge to this, which is the culture of an organization should be such that it's filled with the capability and it offers more capability to drive the organization forward as well. And often those things are seen as being in tension with each other. And actually, the goal should be to overlap and deliver what people want, in addition to what the organization needs to move forward and edge closer to its vision.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. I mean, I know the expense of bringing somebody in your organization and having them train them up, having them for a year and a half, and then they leave is a very expensive proposition. Not only from the recruitment standpoint, but the upscaling of that employee to be a productive member of the team. And then if it doesn't work out because of that alignment of value structure and culture, it's one, frustrating for the employer and the employee, but it's also very expensive for the organization.
Absolutely, and I think we're seeing that play out. It's as the economy shifts and it's volatile and it goes up and down. Organizations have to make mass layoffs. And within those layoffs, there's talent that they're going to be recruiting for in less than 12 months. There's not to mention the diversity that they fought for the last 2 or 3 years to sort of build. And there's also a trend now of getting back to skills-based hiring. Which is all important, of course. But if you take culture plus skills and talk to leadership about this, it adds up to capability. And leadership are interested in, okay, talk to me about how capable our people are to do the job at hand. And it's not just about skills; it's about how individuals work together as teams and how capable they are. As a result of the culture.
Yeah, and just from my own experience, I think the skill piece of it will show itself within the first 12 months. That value piece, that disconnect with the culture, may take 3 to 4 years, and that's oftentimes much more difficult, expensive, and has long-term issues for the organization than that first 12 months. My skills don't match up, or vice versa, organization to employee versus employee to the organization. So yeah, I think you're hitting on a really key point there. So you work with a lot of large corporations and probably much smaller organizations as well. And from a organizational standpoint, how are they leading through this hybrid culture of the work cycle? And what are you seeing from your perspective on, what the challenges have been, but then what's the next migration, I guess, if you will, of what we're going to look like in 5 years?
Yeah. So do you know what, Randy? The honest answer is what I'm seeing in both global organizations with tens or hundreds of thousands of employees down to, aggressive startups with a couple of hundred people is trial and error. Because it's unprecedented times, and you've got organizations trying to go from 100% remote back to the office, which is fraught with danger and difficulty. You've got organizations accepting 100% remote, but struggling with innovation and teamwork and collaboration, which, is where organizations feel the effects 12, 18 months later when products aren't landing as well as they used to in the marketplace, or not even landing on time anymore. So it's coming in waves, and it was once, not so long ago, months ago, it was a talent-driven market, and now that seems to be shifting. But rather than organizations being able to just dictate the employee experience, there's talent that have decided, we talk about the great resignation. I called it the great epiphany. There's millions of people all over the world waking up, realizing the meaning of life and what they want out of their life, what they're willing to compromise and what they're not. Yeah. So there's a bit of a sort of crossroads happening at the moment where it still hasn't shaken out, where people are very deliberate and intentional around what they want from a career, and organizations are still scrambling to find the winning combination to be able to get what they need as an organization and still be competitive in the landscape. And there's still a lot to shake out to come, I think. We're going to see the ripples of this for a number of years.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch because we all know that the culture of any organization is foundational to your future success. But we also, I guess, from just my perspective, it would be much easier to develop that culture when you're all in the same building together.
Yeah, absolutely. But it begs the question: just because it's got significantly harder, does that mean that it's not worthy of the effort? And there's
Yeah,
also the argument
yeah,
that if somebody is working alone most days in an office that's part of their house, when you demonstrate empathy and compassion and you go to effort to reach out and let them know that they are part of the team, I've seen instances where an element of real human effort lands with greater impact because it's harder, because it
mm,
requires more effort. So it's more meaningful when it actually happens. So there are moments of magic that can be done. It is getting harder. You do need to be a little bit more creative. But the first step is you need to understand what culture you are cultivating and have the parameters of
yeah,
what do we stand for, what do we believe in, and what behaviors are we going to
yeah.
encourage, and how are we going to lead by example.
No, I think those are all really good points, and from an employer perspective, I think we have to be able to change as well to meet the new demand and this new dynamic that's come with the out of the whole COVID era. So
Oh, it sure is, and I'm sure there's more twists and turns to come as well.
yeah, well, it kind of leads me into my next question because the generation that has entered the workforce, I guess, starting about 10 years ago. I think one of the things that's really evident with them is they're looking for value alignment with what they do in life and who they work for. And so, what are you seeing with that, and what would be some advice for organizations to begin to develop that value alignment brand, if you will, so that they can attract talent?
Yeah, so it's probably easier to answer that question by starting with what not to do. And I think it's really easy to do some research in the marketplace, come back and say, right, it looks like the talent is looking for these things, therefore we should offer these things, and this is who we should become. And I think to be reactive and to chase the trends of a talent market is a mistake. And I think the key thing here, and I write this in the book, is there's three aspects that people are looking for, and it's a sense of purpose, a sense of impact, and a sense of
Mm-hmm.
belonging. And they're just sort of three derivative aspects of what we're all looking for in life, never mind our career. And I think if we take a look at our business model and we look at the capabilities required to drive the organization forward, we can develop a proposition that supports that culture that we need, and we can be very clear with our storytelling and in a compelling way. And this is the key: tell the talent audience and explain how and why they will get their sense of purpose, impact, and belonging. And if it resonates, and if it's differentiated, if it's more relevant to that audience than your talent competitors, and it's memorable in some way, then you'll start to win. But it has to be authentic and it has to align with the business strategy.
And that kind of takes us into the importance of the employer brand, does it not? And I know that's really one of your areas of expertise. So as you're coaching organizations to develop that brand, what are some of the tactics that you move an organization through to help them to do that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And, this might sound obvious once I say it, but you'd be surprised how many organizations are effectively rudderless when it comes to, what's the North Star? Like what's the
Mm-hmm.
destination we're trying to sort of get closer towards? So from a strategic perspective, it's looking at what's the reputation we need in the marketplace that is going to serve us best. And quite often, when you ask that question, it's we want to be the most attractive, or we want to be known as the world's best employer. But when you ask why and what are the specifics around that, a lot of organizations fail to answer. And strategically, we've identified there's three types of reputation as an employer. What we like to do is get really tangible and specific about what will serve our client partners best. And those, we call them the three C's. The first is culture, which most organizations are familiar with in the employer brand space. A lot of organizations trade on how it feels to be part of your organization. So trading on culture. The second is career catalyst. So is your organization a place to accelerate your career? And I'm thinking of places like Amazon and McKinsey, who aren't necessarily known for their warm and fuzzy sort of employee experience, but they are known that if you can do 2 years there, you can drive your career forward and go on and be a lot more employable afterwards. And then certainly with the younger generations that we've talked about already, Randy, the third C is this idea of citizenship, an organization that sets out to leave the world better than they found it. And, now millennials, Gen Z, and later generations are all looking for, in an identity culture, looking for the peace of mind. And that's sort of the element of conscience that they're working for an ethical employer that's doing good in the world. So that's actually rising in priority. So if you know what type of reputation you're looking to carve out in the marketplace, then you can start to reverse engineer everything back from there, starting with the raw ingredients of your culture, what people appreciate, why people join, why they stay, and build from the ground up. So the reputation is the North Star. Then we've got the expectation, setting expectations appropriately. So more of a smart filter than a magnet just to generally attract. So that's the middle layer, the employee value proposition that we've mentioned briefly. And then the final piece, Randy, is where the rubber meets the road, is the experience. How do you take the reputation that you're looking for, the proposition that you've set out, and make it turn up in reality so people feel and experience those branded moments that are both authentic and aligned with what you're setting out to achieve? And there's a strategic approach to making sure that all of those things align, and that's the magic. That's the key to an employer brand that will serve you well, both from a talent attraction, engagement, and retention perspective.
Yeah, excellent observation. I was talking with a young person the other day who was out searching for, one of their first jobs, and just out of college, and she made a really interesting observation. She said, I've looked at several companies, have applied. I look at their mission, vision, values, but I find that their behaviors don't match what they say they have on the wall. They're really not doing what they're saying they're doing. And she says, that's what I'm looking for. And I said, well, that's smart that you know that at your age. I don't think many of us had that perspective. So I think your observation on this alignment piece is really, really important.
Yeah, and we've got to give the talent audience credit. They spend between 6 and 8 hours researching a company before they decide to engage and apply for a role. And that incongruence is actually easy to sniff out if it exists. And if you've created something in a void and you try and project an employee experience and set expectations falsely, it's actually quite easy to detect. I mean, the reality is a lot of organizations, if you take the employer brand and what they claim and you do the same with their talent competitors and you shuffle them about, a lot of the time it's indistinguishable. They talk about the same sort of thing. And, it's simple, but it's not easy, and it's finding something that really resonates, that is unique to your organization, that you can really set your stall out against. That's the trick. It's simple, but it's not always easy.
Has there been an event in your life or events that have really shaped who you've become as a person and as a leader?
Ooh, there's been a few, and usually it's sort of it's usually been near devastating mistakes and sort of recovery, or but I remember very early on, we nearly went out of business because there was only a handful of employees. It fell to me to go out there and get new clients, and I had a debilitating fear of public speaking, such that I wouldn't stand up in front of 12 people and give a presentation or put myself forward to do sales pitches or opportunities, and I had to do something about it. Otherwise, we were faced with going out of business. And my business mentor at the time said, "Look, you've got to do something drastic here. So the first thing you've got to do is double your prices," which I thought was crazy, but it turned out to be great advice. And the second was find the gumption to conquer this fear of public speaking. So I did a stand-up comedy course, and which was quite unconventional. And I didn't quite know what I was signing up for at the time, but it was 6 weeks of hell. I lost about 17 pounds in weight. So it was great for weight loss. If anyone is looking to lose weight in a short space of time, try doing a stand-up comedy course. But I had to deliver 15 minutes of my own material at a comedy festival in front of 300 people. And needless to say, I didn't become a successful comedian afterwards, although I did get some jokes in the right places. But it was life-changing, when I came off that stage, having successfully got through that ordeal, and it became sort of quite enjoyable. I was a different person, and learning to push through a fear and get out your comfort zone. I guess that's a bit of an entrepreneurship cliche, but that was my moment, and it really was life-changing. And from that moment on, I've since spoken on stages of, in front of 5,000-6,000 people, and really, really revered the opportunity.
Yeah, very cool. So how important is leading yourself and having a growth mindset for a person to really achieve their full potential?
Wow. I mean, that's a big question, Randy, but I've always tried to have mentors. I'm always reading, and sort of when I'm running, I'm listening to audiobooks and just sort of trying to get new ideas and so on and so forth. And in terms of leadership these days, I think my approach has matured a little bit in the last few years, actually, where I try and always surround myself with people better than myself. And unfortunately, that's actually not very difficult for me. But everybody talks about Start With Why with Simon Sinek, but Leaders Eat Last resonated with me more. And I try and be more of a servant leader, listen and coach, and back people around me, and just try and knock down walls and obstacles when things get in their way. But other than that, leave them to do their role, because I've been a micromanager over the years, and I've had to sort of really work on myself to not do that. And I've definitely seen the fruits of that labor.
Yeah, I think one of the most rewarding things from a leadership perspective is when you give people the opportunity and the resources and just let them go. And when they do really great things, it's just really a powerful moment, not only for them, but I think more importantly for the leader, because it gives you that, I think, that perspective that sometimes all you have to do is just open the door for them. They want to do good work for you. Yeah,
absolutely. And the irony in it, of course, is it takes a lot less effort to lead than it does to manage. There's a lot more leverage in leading than managing. And I think that penny took a while to drop with me as well. But thankfully, I embrace that for all it's worth these days.
So for the next generation of leaders, what leadership challenges are you seeing emerge today that will likely impact them as they move up the ladder in whatever their profession is?
Well, I think the volatility of reality as we know it, the emergence of technology and how it's impacting. But actually, for the first time ever, we're seeing organizations being expected to have a worldview and an opinion on things like politics and civil rights and so on and so forth, which is a new dynamic to organizational leadership that, it was a social norm that brands just stayed out of that stuff a few years ago. But
Yeah.
You mentioned it earlier, Randy. Younger generations now, they are informed, they are opinionated, they have a worldview, they expect the brands around them to have an identity and have a voice. It's almost demanded of them. And also, there's a tempting marketing opportunity to leverage by doing that sometimes, but we've seen examples of that, like Nike, for example, client of ours. They stick to who they are, and when it's appropriate, they're not afraid to share their feelings and show their political views and stand behind things that are happening in the world. But of course, they've always done that, and it's always aligns with what they've always said that they believe in. Whereas some organizations may just jump on trends and bandwagons as a short-term opportunity to get attention, and that can blow up in your face. And so there's new dynamics such as that to contend with, and it's getting ever more complicated to lead brands through that, especially if you haven't got a strategic brand plan, and most organizations don't. So that's definitely a complication that I see as an additional challenge from a leadership point of view these days.
So are you seeing a lot of organizations today in their strategic design process making the decision, we're either going to jump in and do that or we're not?
Well, that's our advice, is to identify what is the decision-making criteria. So in order to establish that, you need to know who you are as an organization, what's going to serve you well, what are we aligning with, what hills are we willing to die on, versus stay away from. And most organizations, a lot of the time, they haven't considered those questions. But the idea of a brand is to offer additional independent decision-making tools such that if you're not in the same room as your teammates, you can be fairly confident that they'd make the same decision as you. And that's how you get brand alignment and consistency at a global, complex organization. So that's a big part of the strategy work that we put in place.
Yeah. Great perspective. So, Bryan, hey, thanks for being on the show today. Anything you want to leave us with before we jump off?
So if there's anybody running an organization or part of an organization they're leading or managing, sometimes it's the perception that an employer brand is for large organizations. And I want to dispel that myth before I go. Everybody has an employer brand. It's just up to you whether you define it or not. And just always remember that people are the only competitive advantage left in business.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Crucible podcast. If you have a story of adversity you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Join us next time as we continue to explore how to live lives of success and significance.